Welcome to another tier list. This one's going to be video game consoles and a couple of handheld uh, systems that I have owned or played at one time or another, or on multiple times. So the categories are addicted, which they're my favorite. The second category is ping, where they're just below that. There are systems that always go back to for kind of like when you're kind of like want to take a break from your top ones. Um, Third category is meh. Fourth one is collecting dust. These are systems I like. I'll maybe play it for one game or something, right? And then dead is just systems that are shit and don't have any existence of ever being made. Not too many on this list. So, not going in any particular order, we are going to go with 3DO. Now, this was a done by Panasonic and a company called NEC at the time. And if I remember correctly, when the system came out, it was 199, um, which was very expensive at that time. I'm not going to go into the years and everything. You can look this up. But that one, hmm, looking at it today, I'm gonna probably put that. Man, this is tough. Actually, tough with this first one. I gotta put in collecting dust. It had at its time, the problem with it was it didn't get a lot of third-party support, main company support. It had bit of Capcom. Trying to think. Uh, I think Namco was Namco around at the time. There was minimal AAA support for the system. And I think in the long run that hurt it. Not only that, the system itself was very expensive at the time. At least, 199 is a lot of money back then. Um, Hell, if you could pay for a console for that price today, holy shit, you'd be laughing. And not happening. Um, Considering that they're talking about having like $1,000 consoles, it's crazy. But anyway, um, it had one port for your controller, and the only way that you could have other multiple controllers is on the controller itself. It had a little port itself to plug that controller in and kind of cherry link like that. There was very rare four-player games. I think, from what I remember, I think of maybe one, but as a console for itself, the as I said, the AAA support was very low. They did have some good ones on there. They had Way of the Warrior, a Mortal Kombat ripoff, which no one's beaten to this day, from what I see. I've looked on YouTube and nobody's beaten that game because it was so cheesy hard. The AI was insane. Um, Super Street Fighter Turbo, which was the direct arcade version of that game. That was cool. They had Samurai Showdown, um, Road Rash by EA. Um, there was a lot of weird games on it too. But this is also around the time that the full motion video games were a thing. Night Trap and no, not PO'd, Firefox, Brain Dead 13, Dragon's Lair, like that kind of thing. Space Ace. Um, so yeah, it just came out at a time when like disc games were still new. but it didn't get a lot of support. It lasted for what I remember a couple of years, like 2 years. Um, Now, if you get it there, I think like the best games are very hard to get. Um, I remember they had a really good one. What was that? I'm thinking of another system. I think it was the 3DO. They had this really good Sherlock Holmes game, but I could be thinking of a different system, but I'm pretty sure it was on 3DO. But um, yeah, it died out. And nowadays, there's only a couple games on it that are worth playing. Like I still think that it's has the better version of the last really good Road Rash game by EA. The controls and everything are perfect for it. So if I were to own that system, it would be in the back of my closet collecting dust. I'd pull that out just to play that game or Way of Warrior. But it is what it is. Um, Atari 2600. That one's going in meh, only because I like another system that came out at the same time better than that one. But Atari 2600 had your Donkey Kong and Pac-Man, and but the graphics were not as they were. I wouldn't say they were poor man's arcade versions of themselves, but I remember they were very low grade. Okay. And we're gonna get to that other system in a second, but I had my good time with it. I had one. I owned 2600 for a short period of time, and then someone sold it on me. But it's definitely a system that most people around that time would probably go, "Oh, 2600," and then they had, I believe, the 7200. So they had iterations after, which I didn't own, but the 2600 I did. So ColecoVision is around the 2600 time, but ColecoVision had better graphics at the time. It was basically Nintendo's first, like they made games for it. I don't remember if ColecoVision was owned by Nintendo at the time. I think Nintendo was just starting out uh, making games. I could be wrong. There's a lot of history there that I would have to like look up. But ColecoVision had the funky controller where it had the buttons and you slide certain cards inside the controller to play certain games like Lock. I think it was Lock and Chase. Games like that. The controller was like very analog. A lot of pops built on it, and it would make that sound. You were playing it, but it was a cool system. I had Donkey Kong, I had Pac-Man, as close to like I guess arcade versions of themselves as they could possibly get at the time. Venture, love that game. Venture, it was hard as hell, but that was a cool game. And had a lot of really cool like arcade type games on it. Um, Graphically, it was a lot better than the Atari 2600. So if you had money, you would get ColecoVision. If you had the just enough to get a system, you would go with the Atari 2600 at the time. Same games, but graphically they were very different. So yeah. Now this one I put on here because I remember it very fondly. The Apple computers back in the day with green screen and disk drives, the very fat 1.44, I think there were something like that. They're very fat discs that you had to slide in the disk drive, lock it, and play these games. So that one I'm actually gonna put in pink because I have a lot of fond memories of it. Um, I had friends that owned them. And then they had these things in schools at the time, where you were allowed a certain amount of time on them, of course. But when you had one at home, they had all these like you had like a whole case of these floppy drive games, and you would go through and they all fit on one disc, and you'd pop it in and it would load and you would play it. It was really interesting. I remember that. Um, I don't remember if I think the games themselves came in boxes, would have had to. Um, and these games were like, graphically, they were fine. They were on a green screen, so you didn't get color. They had all these different kinds. They had Donkey Kong, they had Adventure, but they weren't as graphically there as ColecoVision. So it would kind of be like, the lowest end would be the Atari 2600, and then you would go Apple green screen computer, and then you would go ColecoVision for your kind of like choices at the time for certain games. Certain games would be on one system and not on another. So that was kind of like a console war deal at the time. But Atari Jaguar is a piece of shit. Um, that thing had no games. The controller was terrible, uh, bulky as hell, and luckily I never owned one because the thing looked stupid to begin with. But like I played it, uh, but it was a horrible system. It didn't last long. I think maybe a year, and it could have been longer than that. I have to look it up, but it's definitely one that's like in the forgotten realm of video game consoles. It was just total shit. So moving on. Neo Geo, I'm gonna put in addictive. Now, having said that, I never owned one, but I would have loved to have one because this system had expensive ass games that were over like $200. And to find the system itself was very difficult. But if you had it, you were golden, if you could afford to buy the games for it. It had like all the arcade games kind of like at the time. SNK, like Fatal Fury and World Heroes, and then Capcom with their Street Fighter games and all. It had Alien vs. Predator. It had like it was an arcade machine, and that's rightfully so why it was very expensive to buy. Uh, but if you had it, it was awesome. Now the controllers were okay. I remember you could actually buy the controllers that came with, I believe, were just regular controls, but you could buy the arcade stick controller, which was pricey. I have to again look that history up of that system, but it was definitely one that if you had it, you would be addicted to it because it had all the awesome arcade games in the arcade at the time. So Nintendo 8-bit Nintendo, who hasn't played the shit out of their system when they owned it? This was like the first big game console for me personally that I ever owned. Remember you had to blow in the cartridges and shove it in. And you had to like keep the cartridges clean, and the controller was like this small. I mean, in my hands, it would be like that big. You had the two buttons. You had the select and start, and then you had the crosshair controller. That was it. There was no top buttons at the time. Um, And they had like a whole whackload of games. Obviously, Mario. They had, I believe, I don't know if, I think, trying to think now. Yes, it was 8-bit Nintendo that had the game Gyromite, where you hooked this robot up, and it had like I don't know, top, I guess, would pick it up and drop it, and that was the way the game is meant to be played. You can still play it on the controller with a second controller, which you actually had to do because in the game you were this old guy and you had to lead him through like these pipes would come up and down and you had to get him through there and you would use the pipes to like crush enemies and stuff and the robot was a pain in the ass but it was a gimmicky thing. um, Also there was the power glove, uh, which you sweat through like anything, and it was gross but a very innovative thing at the time. And it had all the buttons and everything on it for playing certain games. Um, I'm pretty sure those were for the 8-bit Nintendo. Oh God, going back so far. Uh, they're gimmicky, yes, they're gimmicky. Let's look it up. Have to look it up. Okay, let's do it. Nintendo Power Glove. I'm gonna hate myself if I don't. Okay, so this was for the original NES right here, 1989. What about the Nintendo robot? Rob. Okay. So it was for the NES system, so I was right. 1985. Okay. There you have it. So I was right, because I didn't think it was for any other system there. But yeah, the Power Glove was just gross after a while because you sweat inside after playing with it, and it didn't always work, and the sweat would like short out the electronics in the glove because I don't think it was made properly, but it was a cool little gimmick. If you took care of it, it would last. Seriously, if you didn't like play hours and hours on end you the thing would be fine, but eventually, because of the wiring, the way the wiring was to plug it in, and all it's bad. And then the robot was just actually pretty damn useless. And you had to actually use the controller for gyromite. It was specifically designed for a gyromite, but I believe there was one or two other games that you could uh, use it for specifically. Uh, I think Clax, you could use it for that game Clax. It was a puzzle game. Pardon me. Of course, my nose decides to be annoying. But yeah, 8-bit Nintendo, you could go bananas with. That was a very awesome system and still live in memory as one of the greatest of all time. Atom computer is going and collecting dust. So this was the, I just call it the Atom computer. Um, Let me see what company made it. Uh, Coleco Atom. Okay, it was called Coleco Atom. I thought so. Coleco, Vision, Coleco. All right. Um, so it was a system that had tapes, and the games were on these tapes. And I believe that they didn't have a whole lot of games that were good. Uh, but you some games I believe you had to put in two if they were bigger, one if they were smaller. But the games that we played, Buck Rogers and Dragon's Lair. Dragon's Lair was actually cool. Because it was a more of a 2D kind of game rather than the arcade version of Dragon's Lair where it's like full animation, point and click type of deal. It was hard. Buck Rogers was like basically a shooting game. Um, I guess what do they call left to right kind of shooter, your ship. And then those were like the two that we played the most. I can't tell you like how many games there were. You probably look it up and find that there were quite a bit of games for it, but eventually it died out because like the tapes would you play it so much the tapes would get degraded and it would get stuck and get ruined inside the player and It was a very unique idea for tapes for games, but it is what it is. Nintendo 64. I'm gonna put that in meh. Honestly, I hated the controller on this thing, and it was awkward. It's the Star Trek Defiant ship from that show. That's the way it looked like it. Um, that's what a lot of my friends said about it. But it was so gimmicky. As you could see there in the middle there, I'll just show you a bigger picture of the. Um, so we get a bigger picture of the controller. So here we are. So right in the middle, that thing would break so easy, like not even playing like every day, because it would get stuck or the mechanism holding the stick inside it would break or crack, and it would just lay there. The C buttons here, a lot. I don't know why they thought of this, but the C buttons were used for like some of the fighting games and stuff, and it was awful. They were very hard to push, especially over time. The A and the B were fine, and then on the bottom it had a trigger, so not too many games use that. I believe the Mario Kart did because you need an accelerator. I think that's how it worked. I don't remember. But they had the two buttons at the top. They were fine, but overall the controller itself was such a piss off, man. Like, oh my God. So also I'm putting it in meh category because it only had a few games that I really liked on it. Um, the Zelda games, so Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, and then the Wind Walker, I believe came out on that too. I believe. So look, man, I've got to research, man. That's fine. Waker. I come out on the dead release in the GameCube, so it didn't come out on Nintendo 64. Well, we'll get to that system momentarily. Will, but um, fighting games on the system with that controller were terrible. Uh, I love Mace the Dark Age though. That was a good kind of arcade rendition of that game by Midway. It was medieval Mortal Kombat, I guess you could look at it that way. They did have Mortal Kombat on there, but overall, it's a mess system to me because personally, I didn't find a lot of games on there. Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing. Um, I think Diddy Kong was on there. Jeez, man, how could I forget all this crap? Terrible, my brain. Uh, yes, 64. I was right. So go away, brain. You're confusing me. All right, that's where the Nintendo 64 is going. Dreamcast. Ping. So Dreamcast is an interesting one. The Sega system was their last system they ever did. It had a big design flaw. It had you could burn games and play them on the Dreamcast without modding your system. I remember discovering that from a friend of mine at the time. I did buy their games. Don't get me wrong. I did buy their games, and they had a lot of really cool games on it. Crazy Taxi. They had a weird fish game where you had to raise this fish by feeding it and stuff. What the hell was that called? Seaman. They had a really cool, like one of my favorite Crash Derby kind of games on there. Demolition Racer, love that. They had Monaco Grand Prix on there, fun game, like really neat. The controls themselves were kind of weird. So if we look at our the Dreamcast controllers, they were bulky too. They weren't like the best controllers in the world, but you could hold it, and it had the triggers at the top. Okay, you had the awkwardness was the um, joystick at the top there. You had the crosshairs, and then you had A, B, Y, and all that there. Um, which were fine. It was kind of like a mixture of Nintendo 64 and a Nintendo controller, I guess. And then in here you had your card reader thing you stuck in there, and that was for your saves. And I think they were originally trying to get people to use it as like a um, I don't know if there was like an actual game on that thing or not, but it was different. It was very different there. You'd have to research on that bit, but like you had to use that little car. It was about that big. I don't know if they have that on here. Uh, there it is, right there. So it was kind of like this. I don't think that's it exactly, but it was kind of like this where you shoved it into your. See, there's a picture here where it's working and all that while you're playing your game. But um, Dreamcast was fun. It had quite a bit of games on it that were really good. They had Resident Evil Code Veronica. At the time, I played the shit out of that game. That's on my Resident Evil tier list, and I ranked it so low because after all these years, I find the game like it could have been better than it was. But anyway, Dreamcast, I would play that again, definitely. It's one of those systems that, I really do miss the Sega systems. There were a lot of them were cool. Game Boy SP, that's going to the Addicted. That had a lot of cool games on it. It was like basically the color. You could play the old Game Boy games on it, and it would work perfectly. So it's backwards compatible. And the battery actually lasted quite a while. The original Game Boy, which was battery based, and this Game Boy SP was charge based. From what I recall, I could be wrong. I think I was each plugged it in and charged it USB. But anyway, it was an awesome handheld system, and I think that's probably my favorite handheld system that I've ever owned um, and came across. Um, so, PS3, that's an addictive system, man. I played the shit out of that. Uh, I got eventually over time, I got the slim version, which was really good and less bulky. Those first iterations of PlayStation 3 systems were clunkers, man. Um, and it was great, all the way through and through. It's one of my top systems of all time. It had so much in it, so much going for it. Um, so many games. Like the list is almost endless on there. Um, they had the store, which actually was really good. The PlayStation Store, it was really strong. Obviously, PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1 didn't have a store, so PlayStation 3 was like the first PlayStation store that I can recall. And you could like get games on there and stuff. But also, uh, you go to your local hobby gaming store there, and you can trade in games, and you can trade in for a new game and stuff. That brings me back. Here in Canada, they had a store, a video game store called Microplay. Those that are Canadian or might be familiar with that name. From what I know now, I'm not sure if they still have a Microplay around. Uh, let's see. I'll be damned. Still have my perplex. Where are they located? Kitchener. Actually, I won in Kitchener. Wow. It's like they went EB style. Toys. That's a shame. Oh, they have one in Brantford. Well, for those that know Canada or know Ontario, probably will recognize those locations. But there you have it. They have two locations still. They've turned it into an EB Games, but um, back in my day, it was strictly a video game store, and they had all old systems and newer systems, and you could trade games in their discs and stuff. And that's the way I wish it still continued. But of course, here we are in the digital universe. All right, moving on. That one was. Yeah, I gotta look at this. I think that was. Yeah, that was the Amiga. Yeah, that was the Amiga. Pretty sure. Because it looks like the Genesis. So I want to be sure I get it right. No, that's the Amiga. Okay. So this is the Genesis. That's going at the top. So Genesis was an awesome system there. Had Fantasy Star and Vector Man. It had what's their title mascot at the time? He had one on there, Superboy. Superboy. Um, Obviously, it was well known for its EA Sports titles, but I don't really give a shit about those. But Genesis had some cool shit. Um, and also it was like we'll get into Super Nintendo, but it had the blood version of the original Mortal Kombat way back when. Uh, you had to put in a cheat code to get it. The graphics for that Mortal Kombat game were E, and the music was E. Super Nintendo was superior for that, but again, we'll get to Super Nintendo. Um, but Genesis, man, it had some awesome games, and that was the console war between Sega and Nintendo at the time. And console wars, I think, like were a healthy kind of competition for companies back in the day. Not so much anymore. I feel that all the companies have gone corporate and just are gouging the shit out of players for mediocre to terrible games, charging $100. Back in the day when they had more consoles, multiple consoles, they had console some companies that tried their hand in making console video game systems and worth a shot. Why not? It could take off, right? Some of those you remember, some of those you don't. I mean, I have to even say like the Atari Jaguar, like they gave their shot for keep trying to keep up, but in my view, they didn't. But it is what it is. So I think the console war was good, healthy competition back there because like you could have a friend that had a Genesis and you could have a Nintendo, and there were some games on one and the other that weren't crossover. And so you would go over to your friends to play that game, and they would come over to your house to play that game. It was awesome. It was a healthy competition, I believe, and that's been lost in the consoles. I would say the console war has not happened since probably, honestly, the last one was probably PlayStation 4 and Xbox 360, kinda. Let me think. No. PS3. Like I'm talking strong. PS3 and Xbox 360. Yeah, that was probably like the last good stretch of strong competition with companies with games, some games on this one system that aren't on the other. I think that's that was the last like good iteration of that kind of deal. But Genesis will be there in a very addictive system. Awesomeness. TurboGrafx 16, putting that at the top for me. I love the system. I still love the games for it. It didn't get much like the 3DO. It didn't get the AAA um, launch. AAA games skipped over this one for the most part. I'm trying to think. Did they have any? They didn't really have any. Uh, Fighting Street, maybe Capcom, but they had kind of like their own library of games that set themselves apart from the rest during the 16-bit era. Um, and the games came in the chips. I could actually show that. Uh, show, there they are. So if you look over here, that's what the games look like. You not shoved, but you push them in to where the slot goes and they played. You have to be very careful though because um you could damage it, which I did, but um so yeah, you put them in the slot where my mouse is, you shoved them in there and the game's played. And what I loved is on the controller it had turbo options, one, two, and three. One being kind of off, and the two and three being kind of like uh, fat. They were for like shooters mostly, where you didn't have to like keep tapping the button. You just kind of like put it on turbo and you hold it, and it would do it on the screen. Like for a game like say Splatterhouse, for those that remember that game where there was a plot like side scroller and you're walking as the character and they pick up two by fours and they're whacking things with it. That sounds wrong, I know, but get your mind out of the gutter. They had some awesome games, man. Bonk's Adventure, Bonk 2, Keith Courage and the Alpha Zones. I believe they had a sequel to that, but it was shit. It was called something else. I can't remember. Blazing Lasers. Uh, oh, what was that one called? The shooter. Bloody Wolf. Um, China Warrior. Uh, there's some that I forget their names that I played the hell out of, but like they had a library of kind of like their own games, like, and they were fun. Some of them were annoying and made me pull my hair out, but still, like for a system on its own, I think it's a champion of a system. It's too bad that eventually it went out. It is hard. It was hard to find the games at the time, man. Like you had to buy them the day they came out, otherwise it'd be hard for you to get a hold of them. Much like the 3DO system at the time, it was hard to get the good games for that system. More so with TurboGrafx, I believe, because they were bought out pretty good. Military Madness. Oh, Military Madness is one of my favorite strategy games of all time. That was on the TurboGrafx. Like, oh man, that was such a sweet, cool game. Like all it was a hex-based grid. You move your units around and kind of have to strategically plan your attacks and take over their home base and stuff. Oh, it's such a cool fucking game. I love the TurboGrafx 16. Outside of like the main companies, Nintendo and Sega, TurboGrafx is my jam. It was a fantastic system. I wish I still owned that sucker and all the games because it was awesome, pure awesome. If you're doing emulation, I recommend it if you like 16-bit stuff. It has so many cool games. My favorite shooter of all time is on there. Blazing Lasers. Love it. Absolutely love it. Splatterhouse. Uh, like I mentioned, it's a side scroller beat 'em up kind of game with a guy that your main character looks like Jason from Friday the 13th, but it's not. I think he's called Todd or something. But awesome system. Always will be in my heart for that one. That rocks. That system. Love it. Um, Xbox 360. I gotta put it in pain. Great system, a lot of good games. It was Microsoft's best system, to be honest, out of all their Xbox systems, and had a lot of good games. That obviously was competition with PlayStation 3 at the time. But whatever games the PlayStation 3 came out, for the most part, they came out with. Obviously, some rights go to one than the other. Um, I believe Halo. Yeah, they had a couple of Halos on it. I never really fell into the whole Halo crowd. I mean, I got it on the original Xbox, but never really fell into that series too much. They had just a lot of really neat games on the 360, and I played the shit out of it. And yeah, there's too many games to mention. I love the controller. I still have my 360 controller that I use for my Steam games now. For that. Um, Fantastic system. I can't say enough about it. The reason that it's not an addicted is because there are other systems above it that were my more favorite. So if you're looking at this, it's kind of in between Ping and addicted. But uh, anyway, it's going to be in Ping. Great system. I believe. Oh, that was Virtual Boy. Yes, that was Virtual Boy. Virtual Boy sucks. Virtual Boy was a waste of a system. It was supposed to be, I don't know, 3D and whatever. You put the goggles on, you play the game. The thing is that they were like burn your retinas out. They had like Mario Tennis. I don't remember their game lineup, like all of it, but like, oh my God, I could not, like, I put that on, I played Mario Tennis for like 5 minutes, and I took it off, and I was seeing red dots. It was horrible. Burned your eyes out, man. That thing was so unsafe. Like, it was red. I remember it being like pure red. Uh, let me see if they have like any screenshots of it. Yeah, look at that. That's what you saw in those games. Red, just pure red, pixelated red, like no color. And why? Why did they do that? That was brutal. Brutal. Like, I'm sorry, but a game that like could blind you with redness. That's a bad system design. I get what they were going for with the goggles and all, but man, no, that was like, I guess you could look at that as like the Oculus of Nintendo at the time. But no, that was a mistake, that system. So uh believe that's PS4. Um yeah, I'll put PS4 up there. Um it had a solid run. Um, this is this is kind of the last system. Well, the Xbox Series S and the PS4 were the last two systems that I still have. I own. That's where the rest of them I don't own any of the other ones anymore, which was a long time ago. Uh, Minus a couple that I never owned. Um, but PS4 was solid. God of War, uh, Rock Band 4, Guitar Hero Live, which unfortunately was such a that game lasted like a year and then they cut the server out and you lost all those songs. Oh my god, what a money grab that was. Guitar was good though. But PlayStation 4 I had a lot of fun with. A lot of games, disc-based games still. Um yeah, I probably go back and play because I mean I own it, but I don't. I haven't touched my consoles in a long, long time. But yeah, PS4 I'd put up there. It's addicted. I've had a solid time with that system. Um, that's one thing about PlayStation all through its iteration. The controllers were basically the same design all the way through. And I felt comfortable. I would say one complaint about the controls is that they had the analog sticks kind of in there, and it would hurt your thumbs after a while if you play too long with that, especially with shooters and stuff. But it is what it is. The original Xbox, I'm going to put it meh. At least if I played this now, it had games. It had some good games. But at the time, I would always go back to the PlayStation system at that time, whether it be PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, 3. But for Microsoft's first console, it was a brick. It's a huge. It had the Ring of Death. When the first bunch of consoles came out, it had the Ring of Death, and that meant your console was fucked. So you had to get a new one. Uh, and the customer service to get a new one on those was such a pain. You had to send it back, obviously, and then they would send you a new one. But trying to deal with the customer service, I remember when that shit happened was such a nightmare. It got like the first systems got really hot, like the heat sink would, what would happen is the motherboard would, because it got so hot. That happened with the 360 too, early on in those, and they finally corrected that. But um, original Xbox didn't happen too often, right, from what I've heard, but did have the heat issue to begin with. And I have to say that the original Xbox was notorious for being hacked and, you know, putting emulated stuff on there. People figured it out. I remember it was a huge thing all over the news and everything, and people talking about it and shit. That system was the one that like people put their entire movie library on and everything, and they turned it into a computer, which kind of was. But yeah, um, that's just some information there for you. But my personal time with it, I mean, I love playing Counter Strike on it. I love the fact that you could, on some games, you could have your own music soundtrack playing in the background, like Wolverine. Uh, Wolverine wasn't the greatest game in the world, but when you're playing it with your own music in the background, kind of makes up a little bit for it. Need for Speed 2, Hot Pursuit 2, love playing the shit out of that game. That was like the last good Need for Speed game in my personal view. Um, but I had a good time with it. The controller was fine. No complaints there. And I also played Hitman 2 on there. Hitman Contracts. think Hitman. Yeah, yeah. But I had my time with it. So Xbox One can go in dead. That was such a waste of a system. I know it had a library of games and PS4 they stuff, but Xbox One I did like the online service, did like the controller. The whole DRM thing at the beginning of its iteration was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and it turned me off. It turned me off of that system, so I traded it in almost as at the time when I got it. Direct trade for PS4, and I never looked back. Xbox One pissed me off. So that's all I have to say about Xbox One. I would prefer any of these other consoles above it over that. Um, Xbox Series S. I have to put that at addicted. I own it. I haven't turned it on in a long time, but I think this it's a solid system. Solid controller, solid games for it. The online store is fine. I haven't turned it on in a long time, but for the time I was playing it. It was cool. Had the games I wanted. Not much else to say about it. I didn't feel like getting the Xbox Series X. I just went straight digital uh, because it was cheaper. The system anyway. Uh, I got it on sale. Can't remember for how much, and never looked back with it. Yeah, it's a system. I honestly, with between that and the PS4, the ones I do own, I probably would put on the Xbox over the PS4 at this point because I have Rock Band 4 on there and a lot of songs, and I have a guitar still for it that I use for Clone Hero. But yeah, solid system. Not much more I can say about it. Game Boy, the original Game Boy is going at the top there. I played the shit out of that. That was a my first handheld system. Mario Golf. What was that Zelda game called? Minish, not Minish Cap. It was Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening, I believe. Yeah, my first handheld system. I loved it. Um, look at little cartridges, and you kind of look at your collection there, and your little case with all the cartridges. Kind of went through like a Rolodex, and you're like proud of your collection. That was good times, man. It was good times. Mm. Game Gear sucked. Game Gear, I did not like the controls. That it was big. Like, I guess you could pair it. I don't know if it'd be the same size as the Nintendo Switch. Probably a little smaller, but it was Game Gear was bulky, and there was a pain in the ass to put in the cartridges, at least from what I remember. And I wasn't really impressed with the graphics, to be honest. A lot of the games on there were okay to downright shit. Like Mortal Kombat was awful graphically on it. Uh, it didn't last. Did not last in my house. Uh, one of those one of those systems you buy, you think it's going to be the shit, and then much like Xbox One, uh, Xbox One, I think I had a shorter period of time than the Game Gear, but still. The Amiga video game system, I'm gonna put that in collecting dust for the simple fact that like it was playable. The controller was weird. Um, it had a game or two on it, much like the Atom. And it's just one of those consoles that while it did skyrocket above where all the other systems were, it was an innovative. deal. I could have put Jaguar there, but Jaguar was just terrible. The controls, fuck that game. That system, that was just bad. That was just bad. Much like the virtual